to us about hunting the hunters, finding, identifying and recording hunting wasps. Over to you, Liam.
Hello, thank you very much. So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity. When I was invited to give a talk at this event, I was really thrilled, and I thought I'd give a talk on a group of insects which is relatively underappreciated and under-recorded, especially when compared to their cousins, the bees, which in recent years have actually had a lot more attention on them. So, as I said, I'm involved with the British Entomological and Natural History Society. I'm also involved with the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society. So today I've kind of got my Bee Wars hat on. There we go. So for those of you who don't know, Bee Wars is an affiliated society with BENS, and it is a recording scheme society. So it's interested in obtaining, collating and distributing records of Aculeate Hymenoptera in the UK. And that's open for anyone who can make use of that data, from including researchers from all around the world. So in this talk today, I'm going to go through what do I mean when I say hunting wasp? What is a hunting wasp? Then we'll look at some of the features, some of the ecology and life history that kind of characterizes the group. And then the main bulk of this talk is I'll go through some of the more common and iconic species that you might well find in your local nature reserves or even in your gardens, and try and during this give some pointers and little ID tips to help you to identify some of these species, which then when combined with the final two things of the talk, which is where can you find the wasps, and then perhaps most importantly of all from my point of view is can we get those records of these under-recorded route where we can learn more about the species and their distribution. So what do I mean when I say hunting wasp? Well, these are wasps within the Aculeata. So these are the stinging wasps. And in the UK, we have around 230 species. Now, I say around because it depends how you characterize a hunting wasp. There are some groups which by some definitions are in and by other definitions are excluded. And plus, we also have more species turning up all the time, especially with climate change. We have more and more continental species appearing in the south of the UK. Hunting wasps span both the social wasps and the solitary wasps as well. So I came up with this definition where I would define a hunting wasp as a polyphyletic group of Aculeate Hymenoptera, which provision for their offspring via the hunting and preparation of their prey. So what on earth does that mean? Well, to understand that, first of all, we have to have a look at some taxonomy. So wasps, as I'm sure you'll be familiar, are a part of the order Hymenoptera. So these are insects with two pairs of membranous wings, which are joined together by microscopic hooks called hamuli. Now, some of the species have secondarily lost wings, particularly in females, but generally most are winged. So the ancestral Hymenoptera emerged in the Triassic period between 250 to 200 million years ago. And these were most similar to the sawflies, which are around today. So these were herbivorous as larvae, eggs laid on or in plants, and then they hatch, feed on the plant, and then pupate into adults. Now, one group of these evolved a method of protein obtaining, which realized that actually it's much more efficient to get that from another animal. So the evolution of parasitism arose in this group, which became the Orosoideae, superfamily of sawflies. These group of these then evolved the familiar wasp waist. So this is the constriction between the mesosoma and the metasoma, the middle and the hind body, which allowed much greater flexibility and motility of the ovipositor, which really allowed the Hymenoptera to perfect parasitism. This then gave rise to the apocriton hymenopterans, which includes the parasitoids. This used to be a monophyletic group called the Parasitica. We now know better, and it's various groups. And this is one of the most diverse groups of animals on the planet today, the parasitic wasps. In fact, pretty much every species of terrestrial arthropod has some species of wasp which will parasitize it. So within the apocritons, one group took the ovipositor and modified it into a stinger, put a venom sac on one end, and this can be used in attack and, importantly, in defense. So this gave rise to the aculeata. So the aculeata are the group for which bee wars are interested in recording in the UK. But you can see it's a pretty diverse bunch in terms of life history, body form, even in the kind of ecology. Most of these have retained their carnivorous ancestry, but some have actually gone back to being vegetarian, notably the bees. So across this group, when we talk about a wasp, what is actually included in this? Well, this actually includes all of the apocriton Hymenopteras, excluding the ants and the bees. So if we want to be a bit more specific, we can talk about stinging wasps. Well, this refers to the aculeate Hymenoptera, excluding the ants and the bees. Solitary wasp would include all of the apocritons apart from the ants, the bees, and also the wasps which have evolved a degree of eusociality. And then hunting wasp is a little bit more specific. So we're talking about something here which is an aculeate Hymenoptera, but as we can see, it's across several different groups. That's why it's polyphyletic, and it's including this, what I'm defining as this important method of preparing prey. So with that, either by delivering a venom for a sting, which immobilizes, sometimes moving the host into a separate location. That could be a pre-prepared dug chamber. Sometimes the chamber's dug afterwards. Sometimes that is in situ, but there is some kind of preparation. And this is where things like the cuckoo wasp would be excluded from this definition, because they're not really doing this preparation step. They're more aligned to the kleptoparasitic life history. So across the hunting wasp, we have a diverse range of different nesting strategies. So some of them have evolved quite sophisticated nest structures, particularly the social species, where they have a nest made of paper, and it's actually the Vespids wasps which are credited for inspiring the development of modern paper through mulching of wood. Other species will use mud instead and craft entire nesting structures from mud, like this lovely intricate Heath Potter wasp nest. And then the vast majority of the hunting wasp will nest in some form of cavity, often a pre-existing cavity. Often they will also make this bigger. And I divide this into two kind of rough groups. There's ones which nest in aerial cavities, such as holes in trees, particularly deadwood. Old saproxylic beetle holes are a really popular nesting site for wasps. Also hollow plant stems like bramble or umbellifers. And then another big group is what I call the ground nesters. So these are either using pre-existing cavities or excavating a cavity in the ground. Most of these species tend to favor sandy soils just for the mechanical ease of being able to dig into that burrow, as long as it's not going to collapse in after them. So where can we find hunting wasps across the UK? Well, unfortunately for a lot of us, the distribution for most species looks like the one on the left, where they tend to be concentrated in the south of England, which if someone lives in the Midlands like me, can be a little bit annoying, because all the really cool species that you want to see, you have to travel a little bit to be able to find them. However, that's not always the case. There are some species which have more of a northern distribution. And vice versa, there are also probably more species than have a northern distribution, or species which have a very limited distribution. There's quite scarce species, only found at a handful of sites, such as this Pseudopopona, and these tend to be right on the south coast in Kent, Sussex, Dorset, etc. So before we can learn to identify the different species, it'd be quite handy to have a little overview of the anatomy of the aculeate Hymenoptera. So there are insects, so they have 3 different body parts: head, thorax, and abdomen. Now, quite often people see the 3 parts of a wasp and they think, oh yeah, that must correspond to head, thorax, and abdomen. But in actual fact, the wasp waist is a constriction between the first and the second abdominal segments. So it's a bit more accurate if we talk about the mesosoma being the central part and the metasoma being the part at the end. And then looking at some features of the body, which can be quite handy for identification. The wing venation and wing cells can be really useful, particularly, for example, things like the submarginal cells, which are the free cells that we have behind the marginal cell on the forewing. Sometimes they might have one, sometimes two, sometimes three. That can be a useful feature. The head contains several useful features, such as the basal antennal segments. The relative size of those can be very useful. The positioning of the ocelli, the simple eyes on top of the head, and also any patterning on the clypeus or the labrum. And looking on the body as well, the top, sometimes called the scutum, the mesonotum, the patterning of striations or punctuation there can be very useful for helping to identify. And the popodium likewise, which is at the back of the mesosoma, is actually the first abdominal segment. So when we're identifying a wasp, there are some really easy ways we can split it down and make lives easy for ourselves. So I'm all about how to make life as easy for myself as possible when I'm trying to identify any insect. So the first thing to note is that Hymenoptera are weird genetically. They're what we call haplodiploid, in that the males are produced from an unfertilized egg, and they have half the number of chromosomes of the female. In the Hymenoptera, this has meant that they are quite often really sexually dimorphic. So the males and the females can look completely different. Sometimes they're quite similar, but usually they look quite different. So Hymenopterus, we're not just learning 230 species of hunting wasps, we're actually more like 460, because we have to learn the two different sexes as well. But fortunately, for most, there's a really easy way to tell if you're looking at a male or a female, and let's have a quick look at the antenna. Most of them, the males, have an extra antennal segment. Sometimes this makes the antenna look very long and droopy. There are some groups, for example, Ectemnius, where the males also have 12. So then we'd want to look at the abdominal segments to see if we can see 7 or 6. Sometimes as well, you can see that on the tip of the abdomen, you can see certain features which make it obviously a male or obviously a female. Genitalia tend to be internal, but there are kind of some external parts to the genitalia which can be easily seen. Another easy way of splitting them up is just by body color. Generally, wasps, hunting wasps, will be one of 3 different broad color patterns. They'll either be all black, black and red, or black and yellow, sometimes kind of like creamy white. And so that can be an easy way to split it down. Something which is often forgotten and not listed in keys and literature is actually the behavior as well. This can be a really useful key to working out what you're looking at. Where is it? What kind of habitat? What is it doing? Have you seen the nest? Have you seen the prey? If you have any of this information, this can be really handy to help narrow down the possibilities of what it could be. And then finally, I mentioned wing characters already. They can be particularly useful for certain groups. There's quick features that we can look in really quickly to see. It can be very difficult to see that in the field, but if you have a specimen, certainly the wing characters can be very useful. So the hunting wasps are a diverse bunch. I've just got an illustration here of some of the size diversity that we have in the wasp, with our largest hunting wasp species, the hornet, of course, and one of our smallest, little Spilomena wasp. So now we'll just have a little taxonomic tour of some of the species of hunting wasp in the UK. We'll do this by superfamily. So we'll start off with the Vespoideae, which contains the social wasps. So first of all, I'll start off, this is all going to be genus by genus. And at this point, I'll just remind myself to thank all the people whose photos I've used. So most of the photos are my own, but there were some species for which I didn't have any good images. So I'd like to extend my thanks that all images are credited if they're not one of mine. So starting off with the mason wasps, these are Anchus ceres. These are quite a common genus, especially in gardens. If anyone has a trap nest or bee hotel in their garden, as well as bees, they may well have species like this nesting. And these are hunters of smaller moth larvae, things like Tortricidae, and they will collect the larvae, sting, paralyze the larvae, take them back to the nest, and deposit them. After depositing a number in a cell, they'll lay an egg and then seal up that cell with a bit of mud. And then you can see on the right here that if you look, you can see the egg in some of those cells. And then the image right to the right, we have those larvae have hatched and they've consumed all of those paralyzed caterpillars. And then after they've consumed all the food, they'll spin their cocoon and pupate. And then for most of the aculeates, all the univoltine species, they'll actually stay as an post-pupation adult inside the pupal cocoon and overwinter like that until the next spring or summer, in which case they'll emerge. And because they're haplodiploid and the female can choose the offspring of her, the sex of her offspring, whether she fertilizes the egg or not, she'll actually lay male eggs in the front cells and female eggs in the rear cells, because the males tend to be emerge at close and be on the wing from a few days to a week or so before the females. So very clever. The next genus is kind of similar. It's another mason wasp. These time, Samorphous are going after leaf beetle larvae, and there's a really handy little. They can look quite similar, but a handy little feature that to help tell the difference is if you look at the first tergite, Samorphous have this little notch on that first tergite. So if you see this notch there, then you know you're looking at Samorphous, another cavity nesting species. Another mason wasp, at this time a ground nesting species, are the Adenorus. These build these funky little chimneys over the nest entrance on the ground. There's various theories as to why they do this. I think that perhaps the most likely is to help manage parasitism, because all of this prey collected there's a lot of effort, and there's most hunting wasps will have some form of kleptoparasite, another insect which will take advantage of that and lay its own offspring on the provision if they can find it, and that will hatch and eat all of that provision to the expense of the developing wasp larvae. And this is sometimes wasps like the cuckoo wasps, and sometimes it could be flies. There's various groups of flies which will kleptoparasitize wasp nests. So I think these chimneys are probably some form of making it more difficult for the kleptoparasites to get into the nest. Another genus with just one species in this time is Eumenes. This is the heath potter wasps found down in the south, particularly on some of the Dorset heaths, and they build these beautiful clay pots, look a little bit like a Roman urn. And they then collect small moth larvae. Depending on the size of the larva, it would depend how many they actually provision in each pot. When they filled up the pot with the larva, they then turn around, lay a little egg inside and seal it up. So you can sometimes find those spectacular pots. Onto the next subfamily, the Pelistinae. This is just one genus in this country. These are not traditionally considered native species, but we have 4 species which now are recorded from the UK. Some of these species have had breeding populations which have lasted from year to year, so kind of naturalized. And these build paper nests like the other social wasps, except for these don't have a nest envelope, so the cells are just kind of exposed, so you can actually go up and see the larvae inside them. Very interesting group. And then onto the proper social wasps, we have 3 genera of social social wasps in this subfamily: Vespula, Dolichovespula, and Vespa. And there's some easy ways to tell the difference between them. The 2 most common Vespula species we've got here is Germanica and vulgaris. And if we just look at the gena, so the little strip behind the eye, in Germanica it is yellow throughout, and in vulgaris there'll be some form of black marking interrupting this band. So that's a really quick way to help be sure for the species. Another thing is to look at the markings on the face, although this is variable, but in general Vespula tends to have 3 dots and a triangle, and vulgaris tends to have an anchor shaped mark, but that does vary. Next genus, Dolichovespula, easy to tell apart from Vespula if you look at the face, particularly side on. Dolichovespula have a much longer face, therefore they have this malar gap beneath the bottom of the eye and the top of the mandible. There's a space, so if you can see a gap there, then you know it's Dolichovespula you're looking at. And there's a few different species, quite nice, sometimes can be quite variable in the patterning and the colors, but Dolichovespula media in particular is quite easy to tell, because it has this Nike tick on its shoulders, or it looks like a number 7. So if you see that on the pronotum, then you know it's definitely Dolichovespula media. This is one of our larger species, only a little bit smaller than the hornet, and that is the only native member of this genus, Vespa crabio, the European hornet. These are real gentle giants. Sometimes get a bit of a bad rap, I think, just because of their size, but they spend most of the time foraging up in the canopy for Lepidoptera larvae and other soft, easy to access protein insects. Now, hang on a second, Liam. You said there was only one species in Vespa. What about the Asian hornet? Okay, so there are now considered two species in the UK. Since 2016, we have the first confirmed record of Vespa velutina, the Asian yellow-legged hornet. This arrived in France in the Bordeaux region in 2004, so it took a fair few years before it did eventually come over, but it's now, as you can see on this little graph that I've plotted of the confirmed sightings, it certainly is established in the UK. These sightings represent a combination of nests which were subsequently destroyed, but also just individuals found. And you can see it kind of fluctuates all over the place, and these are also geographically really dispersed. So even though these nests have been destroyed, what's not clear is whether these are all separate foundings, or whether there are more out there which are kind of sourcing these ones to get populations. What is sure that it is here now, and it does consistently pop up. We will continue to control it, and any sightings of this should be reported to the Asian hornet watch. So that was our first superfamily. On to the next superfamily, which is a really nice group. There's only one family in this superfamily which satisfies my definition of a hunting wasp, and that's the spider hunters. These are a really cool group. These are highly under-recorded, particularly possibly because of their difficulty with identifying them. There's very few of these that you can identify in the field or from a photo. Many of these do require a specimen. With a bit of practice, once you know what you're looking at, you can certainly narrow it down, and there are some species which you can identify in the field. So I've just got a few little tips to hopefully try and encourage people to have a go with this group, because they're such an interesting and fascinating group. So there's 3 subfamilies in the UK of this family. The Ceropalinae, there's only one genus, Ceropales, and then the other 2 are the main. Most species belong to either the Pepsinae, of course, of the same subfamily that Pepsis, the famous tarantula hawk wasp, belongs to, although obviously not in this country, and then the Pompilinae. So the Pepsinae can be one key feature which can be really handy to recognize these is if you look at the second sternite, it has this kind of sideways groove which almost divides it into 2. So if you, and it changes the shape of it as well. So if you see that, you know, hang on, this could be a Pepsinae, so that limits it down to certain genera. And it also has some features on the hind femur as well. You're looking for the hairs set in pits. The other larger subfamily is the Pompilinae, and a really easy character on these ones, which can really easily help you narrow it down, is this little it's called a pocket on the cell CUA1. It has this extension, and this looks like almost like a snooker table pocket down at the bottom of that cell. So if you see that on the forewing, then you know you're looking at a Pompilinae. So the first genus we're going to look at is Orplopus. These are really cool spider hunters. They go after sac spiders, but they're the only one, as far as I know, that have a slightly different nesting strategy, and they actually construct clay pots, so kind of similar to some of the mason wasps, although obviously this convergence they're unrelated. And they also have this interesting behavioral feature which is relatively unique in the UK, in that they chew off the legs of the spiders and then they carry them back to the nest by the spinneret. The spider, of course, is still alive at this point. The next genus is Dipagon. These are pretty easily recognized because they have these 2 black stripes on the wings, darker patterning on the wings, 2 stripes. So if you see that, you know you're looking at Dipagon. It's 3 species in the UK. It gets a little bit more challenging after that. You have to look at the relative length of antennal segments and certain patterns on the propodium. And in general, these are after crab spiders and tube web spiders. So some intermedius goes for one particular species, Segestria. And then the biggest genus in the this subfamily is Prionemis. These are quite widespread. A really easy character to help you recognize Prionemis is if you look at the hind tibia, there's this row of scales, really distinctive. Once you get the angle, you can't miss it. So if you see it on the back leg, then you know you're looking at a Prionemis. And these tend to go for various spiders, epigeal species running along the ground. So quite often you'll see the wasps themselves also running along the ground. Then onto the Pompilinae, the other major subfamily. Arachnospila is quite a large genus. Arachnospila and Prionemis are the two largest genera in terms of numbers of species, obviously in different subfamilies. And these guys, they can look a little bit similar to Evergetes, but there's a really easy character if you look at the mandible, which is why whenever you're mounting hunting wasps, always open up the mandibles, but because many groups, you want to look at the mandible to see how many teeth it's got. And this is a good example because Evergetes have 2 teeth on the mandibles and Arachnospila have the 3. So that's an easy way to tell once you know it's one of those 2. And most of these species have a tarsal comb as well to help with digging, although I think there is 3 species which don't actually dig their own burrows, but use the spider's burrow as the nesting burrow, and they don't have the tarsal comb. And then perhaps the most distinctive species we're going to look at today is the red-legged spider wasp. This is the only one which really has these lovely red back legs and then these white markings, these white spots on the metasoma. So if you see that, you know you're looking at this species. This is predominantly a coastal species, although it does nest inland anywhere that's kind of sandy site. So the next superfamily is a smaller one in terms of species, just the 3 species. So the first genus has 2 of those species, that's Typhia. These are really cool wasps. They parasitize dung beetle larvae, so they actually dig down into the dung beetle nest, break into the nest chamber, sting the beetle larva, paralyze it temporarily, lay an egg and leave. The larva actually recovers, but only in time to get eaten by the developing wasp. There's 2 species which are quite similar, although Minuta is typically much smaller than Femerata and has black legs, whereas Femerata tends to have red legs, although there is variation in size and coloration. Fortunately, there's another character which is really good, which is if you look at the propodium, there's these 3 ridges, and it either has 3 the same length in Minuta, or the middle one is about half the length in Femerata. And then the other species in the superfamily is Mephoca, which is one of my favorite wasps. Very cool. This is a specialist parasitoid of or hunter of tiger beetle larva, and it runs around. The female's wingless and she's got an extra thick thorax, and she runs around, and the tiger beetle actually attempts to grab her. They quite often feed on ants, so it's a similar kind of mechanism. And it grabs her around her kind of thorax with its jaws, but because it's extra thickened, she's okay. And then she then brings her abdomen round and stings the larva just beneath the head capsule in the soft neck, and paralyzes it before dragging it back down into its own burrow and then laying an egg on it. Very cool little wasp. And then onto the final superfamily of hunting wasps we're going to look at is the Apoideae. So this superfamily also contains the bees, but we're just looking at all the wasps which are not bees. And this breaks down into 2 families, although recent taxonomic work has suggested that some of the subfamilies within Crabonidae should actually be raised to full families. But for the purposes of today's talk, we're just going to conveniently forget that. So the first genus is in the Sphekidae, and that's the Ammophila. So these are quite large wasps, black and red. Typically nest on sandy soils, especially around the coast, but also inland. And these prey on larger moth larvae, things like noctuid larvae. And these have absolutely fascinating behavior. Things like conspecific brood parasitism, where females will sneak into a nest developed by another female of the same species, and then lay their own eggs inside it, taking advantage of all that hard work. And Jeremy Field did an excellent talk about his research on these groups of wasps at the Bee Wars AGM, which is available online on YouTube to watch. So anyone who's even remotely interested in this fascinating behavior, I strongly encourage you to go have a look at that talk. Two of the most common species in this genus in the UK are Sabulosa and pubescens, and there's a pretty simple wing character which helps separate those. So actually looking at the submarginal, the third submarginal is either petiolate or it's not petiolate, and that's the difference. So if you look, the easiest way to see it's on the cells on this little stalk coming off the marginal cell, and the second submarginal is in contact with the area outside. Whereas on Sabulosa, that's not the case. Genus which is kind of similar to Ammophila is Podylonia. These species tend to be a bit hairier, but these are a little bit more coastal as well. But the easiest way to tell the difference between these two genus is to look at the petiole, this really skinny, long first metasomal segment. It's a little bit shorter in Podylonia. It's also a little bit structurally different. It's made of just the first sternite in Podylonia. But yeah, that overall length can tell you whether it's Ammophila you're looking at or Podylonia. Onto the Crabonidae. So starting off with the Astata, this is really nice species, has recently expanded its range significantly. It's turned up in a lot more sites in the Midlands than it used to be. And this is a hunter of shield bugs, particularly shield bug nymphs. In fact, there's a really nice little write-up in the Bee Wars newsletter by Ian Cross, who used their collecting of nymphs as a non-destructive sampling method for what shield bugs were in a given habitat, which I thought was a really fantastic, creative little study. But yeah, this is a nice species. The males have these crazy, huge eyes, which take up almost the entirety of the head. So really distinctive dimorphism between the males and the females on the head. Next is Crabro. These are nice little wasps which nest in the ground, particularly sandy sites, but can be quite varied. Quite widespread, particularly Cribarius. So there's 3 species in the UK. Cribarius is the largest. Pelterius tends to be a little bit smaller, and Scutulatus is significantly smaller. And the males have these really interesting modifications to the front femur, where they have this enlarged femoral, it's called a shield, enlargement of the femur. And they actually place this over the eyes of the female during mating. And it's not certain why, but it's probably something to do with filtering polarized light as a sexual signal during copulation. But fortunately for us taxonomists and entomologists, the patterns between the 3 species are quite different, as well as the coloration of the tibia. So in Cribarius, it's black, yellow, and then the shield. Pelterius, it's yellow, then black, then you have the shield. And in Scutulatus, it's all yellow, and then you've got the shield. And then the females, you need to look at the striations on the scutum, which can help you work out which species you're looking at. Next is Chrysoceros. This is the largest genus in terms of number of species within the digger wasps. Most of them tend to be small black wasps. They nest in a range of different places. So some are ground nesters and some nest in aerial cavities. There are also 4 species which are quite black and yellow marked, so they can look quite similar to some other genera, such as Crabro or Actemnius. But there's some other features you can look at to help distinguish that it is in fact a Chrysoceros. But yeah, really nice little wasps. Very few that you can do in the field. Next is Actemnius. Now this is, in contrast to Chrysoceros, this is much more widely recorded. This is because these are larger wasps, so there are several species which are much larger. They're also quite commonly found in gardens or the kind of places where people will come across them. There's several different species, but there's an easy way to split them into two groups, and that's just looking at the pubescence on the face. So they'll either have golden pubescence, like in this Ectemnius cabrifrons, or they'll have a silver pubescence, like in this Ectemnius cephalotes. So that can be an easy way to split it into two groups. Sometimes they can be quite apparent in some habitats, like Ectemnius laceratus or continuous. Both of those quite common on umbellifer, feeding on umbellifer heads in the summer. Oxybellus. This is another one of my favorite genera. Very cool little wasps. Some called spiny digger wasps, and that's because they have this really distinctive propodial spine. It's huge, great spike coming out the propodium. No idea why, but it's unique to that group in that kind of size and shape. Just that single spine, and these hunt flies. They're ground nesters, but they have this really interesting behavior characteristic for transporting flies back to the nest burrow. And as you can see on the photo on the right, they actually impale the fly on their stinger, and then they carry it impaled on the stinger, and then they'll land a short distance from the nest, remove it from the stinger, and then drag it down the nest with their mandibles, much like the rest of the wasps do. As far as I know, they're the only UK species which does this impaling. But yeah, very, very interesting behavior. It's a very nice thing to watch. Next is Rhopalum. These are nice little, quite colourful little wasps, actually. They have different reds and yellows, particularly on the legs. Two species, and they can be recognized that you are looking at a Rhopalum. They are petiolate, so they have a petiole at the base of the metasoma, so this thin first segment. However, in Rhopalum, it has this swelling at the end, almost kind of like a spherical or ball shape. So if you see a petiole with a swelling at the end, then you know you're looking at a Rhopalum. And these go for a range of different small insects, including Psychoptera, Hymenoptera, and Diptera. Then we have Tripoxylon. I like these guys. These are actually spider hunters, not in the spider hunting family, because they're doing quite different to the Pompilidae. But this is a Crobonid, which also goes after spiders, but these are smaller spiders. And they'll be stung and then carried back to a cavity. These are quite small wasps, so they tend to nest in small beetle old beetle holes in deadwood. And they're quite long, small black elongate wasps. But they have an interesting character, which is very distinctive in the UK. And if you look at them face on, they have this notch on the inner margin of the eye. So if you see a small black elongate wasp with this eye notch, then you know that's a Tripoxylon. A little bit more tricky to get to species after that. Then we have Melinus, which is one of the most widespread wasps, hunting wasps, very common, more commonly recorded. They tend to like sandy soil, but they all nest and turn up in all sorts of different habitats and environments. They're quite distinctive looking. Once you know what Melinus looks like, you should recognize it. It's got this yellow spot on the scutellum on its back, and then kind of generally black and yellow marked. But a nice little character that I use is, if you look at them face on again, they usually have this yellow U shape along the inside margins of the eyes and then across the top of the mouth parts. That yellow U. Sometimes it's less developed. So like in this female here, she's got the strip along the eyes and then just a couple of dots, but they'll always have some form of yellow marking there. And they can quite often be found hunting around cowpats or tree trunks or fence posts, anywhere where flies might be basking. They're kind of going for medium-sized flies. Argogoroites is going for spittlebug. So spittlebug nymphs produce the frothy exudate as a defense against getting predated, but actually that's not a deterrent to Argogoroites, who kind of swim almost through that spittle and sting the nymph before taking it back to their nest. associated with that is Nison. So these are actually kleptoparasites, so not technically a hunting wasp by my definition, but I wanted to include them in association with Argogoroites. These are another ones. These also have spines on the propodium. They have a pair of spines on the propodium. So sometimes they're called spiny digger wasps or something like that. Yeah, they're found in association with species of Argogoroites. Then we're on to the Pemphidonae, which are various genera within the Cribonidae family. Well, this is one of the ones which has been raised as to a family in its own right. So the type genus is the Pemphidion. This is a genus which is actually in a state of taxonomic flux, whereby the status of some of the species is unclear. There could be actually multiple species in a cryptic species complex. Old species concepts are getting sunk, other ones are getting raised. So they're quite challenging. But there is one species in particular which is much easier. It's the largest species. It's in a different subgenus to the rest, and that can actually be recognized by looking at the wing venation. So we see this vein either goes into submarginal 1 in the other group, or goes into submarginal 2 in Pemphidion lugubris, which is the mournful wasp. So if you see a large black wasp with a petulate abdomen metasoma, so this nice petiole hanging around a dead wood, then chances are it's going to be Pemphidion lugubris, and then you can just look at the wing venation to make sure. On to our smallest hunting wasps, the Spilomena. These are lovely little things. These are really under-recorded, very few records of this. And this is almost certainly due to their small size. They just get overlooked by people looking at aculeate Hymenoptera. And they hunt equally small animals, so they are all hunters of thrips. And they nest in various small cavities, old beetle holes. There's also in the literature an association with thatch, so they may well nest in thatching as well. A very difficult group, and you'll see the species ID here with an asterisk, and that's because they're another genus which is undergoing some taxonomic uncertainty, and that coupled with their small size does make them challenging to identify. Then on to our last subfamily within the Cribonidae is the Philanthinae. So the first genus is Cerceris. So these are easily recognized because if you look at the metasoma, they have this kind of ribbing of the sternites and tergites. It looks a little bit like the Michelin man. And these mostly hunt weevils, actually, although there's one species which hunts bees, and that's Cerceris rubiensis. And that one is easily recognized because it has different patterning on the metasoma. So it has kind of yellow, then black, then it has yellow with a little black triangle, then it has black with 2 little yellow dots, and it has black then yellow. So that variable black and yellow striping helps you recognize, make it distinctive compared to the other ones, which tend to have more regular yellow and black patterning on their metasoma. And then the final genus we're going to look at in this talk is the bee wolf. This is one of my favorites. This used to be very scarce, only known from a handful of sites in the UK in the south. But has, under the past 10 years or so, undergone a massive range expansion, probably associated with climate change. And this, as the name suggests, is exclusively hunts honeybees. And the female stings them and then carries them off, as you can see in this little GIF here. This is quite a large distinctive species, and you'll see the female large black and yellow coloration, and it has this chestnut brown coloration behind the eye, which is another quite distinctive character. So that was a few of the different species. So as you've probably picked up from the different nesting habitats, there's 2 ways to find wasps. The first is go to where they're nesting, and you've got 2 broad categories here. You've got aerial cavities, in which case a nice standing dead tree, or even a trap nest like a bee hotel can be a good place to find them. The other is the ground nesters. So you'll want to go to sites like lowland heathland or sand pits or coastal dunes. And quite often they can nest in quite high densities, nesting aggregations, potentially several different species nesting together, as is the case at the Devil's Spitalful in the photo here. So once you've found your wasps and now, you know, has some pointers to identify them, then please send us your data, because as I said, they're massively under-recorded, especially compared to bees. Even the social species, which are the most recording of the hunting wasps, even they are under-recorded. So we'd love to have your data. What makes a biological record? Well, there's 4 essential bits of information that we need. We need to know what did you see, what was the species, and up-to-date species name for all of these can be found on the Bee Wars website. We then need to know where it was, so a grid reference, ideally 6-figure grid reference or better, and a locality information. We also need to know when you saw it, so the date, and it's essential that this is provided in the British format, so day, month, then year, to avoid any confusion. And then we need to know who is the recorder, so who collected it. It's also useful if there was a determiner, someone identified that was different to the collector. It's useful to know that, as well as if a voucher was kept, information on where that voucher is. And if you know it or if you can find it, the vice county name and number is also nice to have as well. Once you've got your records, then there's 2 ways that you can get that to us at Bee Wars. The first is just to email the data team directly, so either Mike or myself. Ants goes to Mike Fox, and you can send a spreadsheet or mapmate files or however you record. The second one, and the one we tend to point most people towards, particularly more casual recorders or more less experienced recorders, is just to put your record straight onto iRecord, and this does a lot of it for you. So it will make sure that it has all the required information, and then we can then go on, verify those records and download that data. Resources, the Bee Wars website is absolutely fantastic, if I say so myself, and has full species accounts for all of our species, including information on the biology, as well as galleries of photos for most species. Along the lines of photos, Stephen Falk also has a fantastic collection on Flickr, as well as I'm also kind of trying to develop my own. So that can be a useful resource if photos are useful to you. The other thing I say is asking people. Generally, people interested in recording aculeates are very friendly and helpful. If you're on Facebook, the Facebook groups are very useful. And finally, you can just send inquiries. I'm quite happy to have a look at stuff if you wanted to send photos to me at my email address there. There's some books that you can see which are quite handy for various different groups of wasps. So finally, I'd just like to thank everyone whose photos I used in this talk. It's really helpful to illustrate what I was trying to talk along, and thanks to you for your attention. And then hopefully they have lots of nice questions which I can attempt to answer.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Liam. Really fascinating talk. Could we just give a little round of applause, for virtual one again for Liam? Thank you for a splendid talk. There are a couple of questions in the chat, but I thought I'd kick off, if you don't mind,
Sure.
with just a couple of quick questions. In particular, you mentioned at the end there the publications, and at the beginning you mentioned how bee recording has taken off, and that's presumably partly largely due to Steve Falk's field guides and George Els's handbook on bees, which has really stimulated that interest. Your talk has got some fantastic tips in. I mean, I've struggled through RES keys in the past trying to identify some of these things. Is there any likelihood of new publications coming out that will open up this world more to people?
Yes. So Mike Edwards is currently working on a handbook to some of these wasps. That is also a Ray Society handbook, like George's bee book. It's not clear when that will come out. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Also, I have started putting together the materials for a field guide to hunting wasps. If you know, if there is interest out there, that is something that I could continue to work on and get that out. I think that would be a different kind of publication, and more aimed at kind of more casual recorders and beginners, just as a starting point, really.
Brilliant.
Something I'd like to do.
I mean, I should also mention that if we have the permissions, then we're recording this talk, and if it's okay with your sources of photographs and things, we will be hoping to put this up on the Ben's website in the members area. And we've now just getting ourselves a YouTube channel as well. So potentially there's this information available for people to come back to and revisit. And that will also be true of those Ento live talks that Kieran talked about earlier as well, that we should now be able to get those onto our YouTube channel. I had one more quick question before I pass it over to other people. The other one was, you mentioned also the paper wasps. And that there's more and more recording. Do we expect to see paper wasps become much more abundant across the UK?
Yes, and for quite a lot of these different groups, either things which have only in recent years turned up in the UK, but or things which were here longer but are spreading. We're seeing more and more, particularly across most insect groups. We're seeing expansions and new species. But I think that's most profound in the aculeates, and I suspect it's probably because they are very thermophilic, so they are quite closely linked with the thermal environment. So with global warming and increased hotter, drier summers, for example, that can benefit these species and this northwards expansion. What it's doing on the other end of their range, I don't know.
Great. Okay, thank you. There was a couple of questions that Sue Taylor put into the chat, so perhaps you could take those first before we open it up to anyone else to jump in. Sue's questions, I don't know, Sue, if you'd like to speak to them yourself, if you're there, put your camera on and voice them for us. That'd be nice.
Yes, I can't remember the wording I used. The second one, though, was that I've observed bee wolves around ivy coletes on sand dunes. So is it possible they take those as well as honeybees?
As far as I know, they don't. They're just on apis. However, if that was an observation you saw, then that would be really interesting. I suspect quite often you find several groups nesting in a similar habitat. So if there's particular sandbanks or areas where you get really high densities of ivy bee, it may also happen to be a suitable nesting situation for bee wolves as well and other species. I've seen nesting aggregations of loads of different species. They're not interested in each other. They're just nesting in the same suitable environment, particularly if it's a sandy, south-facing bank.
Okay. I'll keep people who spend a lot of time on sand dunes to keep an eye out then. And the other thing is that I occasionally see spider hunting wasps dragging spiders around. Is it really useful to identify as far as possible the prey species to species?
Yes, for two reasons. First of all, it can help you work out what the spider hunter is. But for the second thing, for a lot of these species, like I say, because they're not well recorded, that's just in their occurrence. What's even less well recorded is associations and accurate prey association data. So that is really, really valuable and useful data to have. And this goes for all hunting wasps. If you can get an accurate prey record, that's really useful information as well.
So you'd like photos of hunting wasps with their prey as well?
Yeah, the difficulty with spiders is many spiders cannot be identified to species from photo. You need to look at the genitalia, and that can be the case with wasps. You have to look at microscope morphology under the microscope.
Right.
So yeah, if you have specimens, then that's obviously the best way of getting accurate species identifications for the host and the prey items.
And the final little thing was, have you got a favourite species?
Whichever one is in my net, I think.
Thanks.
Very diplomatic answer. Yeah, so I guess the basic message from that little exchange is that as well as lots more to find out about the distribution of our species, there's also lots still to find out about their behaviour, biology and ecology, isn't there? Are there any other questions from the floor? Anybody want to just shout out? Do unmute yourself and speak if you'd like to. Any more questions? If there isn't, I'm going to take advantage in that case. I'm also intrigued by the coloration. We're very used to the yellow and black social wasps and talking about species that mimic them, like some of our clearwing moths and things. There's so many black and red wasps in your grouping here, but they also have mimics like the sawflies, Macuphi. Is it Macu?
Yeah, Macuphi annulata. Yeah.
Annulata, that's the one. Is there much known about what's going on there?
As far as I know, it's a similar. I mean, there's two things going on in terms of things looking similar. So for some of the wasps, it's mimicry. But for some of the wasps, I think sometimes people talk about mimicry, but it might not necessarily be the case. It could just be congruence, right? So these are related species. They're going to have similar developmental genomics, similar developmental processes. They might just look similar because they have developed in the same way at a genomic level.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Great, thank you for that. Are there any other questions from anyone else? All quiet? Great, okay. Well, it only remains really for me to say that we've kept beautifully to time, for one thing, but also it's been a fantastic talk from Liam. I hope you got lots of information as well, enjoyed the first half of our meeting today. I do hope you'll look out for those other meetings that we mentioned in the new year. And we'll close the meeting here, but I would just again like to thank Liam in particular for a fantastic talk. So could we again virtually give him a little applause? Thank you all very much, and we'll end there. Thank you, Gary, for hosting us, and see you again at our next virtual meeting. Thanks all.